Well, hey there, Internet people, and welcome back to Green Wing Gaming, or welcome if you're new, and if you are new to the channel, this here is a Monday upload, and Mondays on this channel, we like to talk about Warhammer stuff. And today, our topic of conversation is gonna be a little different from what we've been doing the last few weeks. It feels like for the last, 2 months, we've just been Dark Angels all the time. To the point where I actually had someone in the comments who seems to be under the impression that this is just a Dark Angels channel. And I'm sorry to disappoint, but that's actually not the case. And just to prove it, today we're going to be moving on to a different faction focus. We're going to be talking about another faction that is near and dear to my heart, and that is the Chaos Space Marines. And before any of you even bother typing out the comments, I'm already anticipating any jokes you're making, but Chaos Space Marines, I thought we already talked about Dark Angels. I've heard all of those jokes before, and to be fair, I still find them hilarious. So, never mind. Go ahead and type them in the comments. I can't wait to hear how you guys put a twist on that old chestnut. But, we are moving on to talking about Chaos Space Marines today, and we're going to start off with the basics. We're going to start off just by talking about the 10th edition Army rule, which is noticeably different from what they've had in previous editions. We're going to talk about their detachment rule. And then in subsequent videos, we're going to talk about, the stratagems and enhancements. We'll probably do a video talking about, their named characters. We're not going to go as in-depth on the individual units as we did with the Dark Angels, because there isn't really a way to break it up the way you could with the Dark Angels. There's not, a Deathwing, Ravenwing division there. So yeah, and trying to go through every unit in the Chaos Codex, that video would be hours long. So I'm long-winded enough as it is. But anyways, I have been looking forward to talking about this. I did start my own CSM army during lockdown. I ended up collecting Night Lords, and folks, if you could have seen the look on my local game store owner's face when I, a lifelong Dark Angels stan, walked in suddenly, asked for the edgiest of edgelords, he was concerned. There was visible concern. But yes, so I have not been super long on the Chaos train. I've only really been at it since 2020, since 2020. Yeah, I was going to follow that up with a number, but no, just 2020. But yeah, so I don't feel like I need to explain too much about who they are. They're literally the primary antagonists of 40k. If you're watching this channel, you know who Chaos Space Marines are. You know what that concept is. For those of you who are somehow super new to Warhammer, Chaos Space Marines are the guys in power armor that's really spiky, and they keep shouting about blood and skulls and thrones. That's the Chaos Space Marines. So, as I said, we're going to be talking a little bit about their rules today, but before we get in too deep into that, I would just like to remind you guys to hit the like button, consider subscribing. We do more videos like this every Monday. I'm technically supposed to be doing longer gameplay videos on Fridays. They haven't been out in a few weeks, which I do apologize about, but they should be coming back soon-ish. It's just been a little tricky trying to find time to film them with, life and my job and all that stuff. But hopefully, if I get enough people subscribing to this, maybe this could be my job, and wouldn't that be delightful? But yes, other than shamelessly trying to self-promote, I would ask you guys to watch as far into this video as you can possibly stomach. I know I can be a little long-winded at times, but the more you watch, the more viewed hours this channel gets, the more it gets promoted. And so that actually does help more than I think most YouTubers really explain to their audiences. But anyway, the only other thing I would ask you guys to do is to leave a comment. Not even for engagement reasons. I don't actually think comments help all that much with engagement. But I've been having an absolute blast responding to you guys' comments, genuinely. It's been a lot of fun. I know the YouTube comment section gets a bad rap as, being some horrible cesspit. I have yet to have a negative interaction in the comments. Not even one. Even, in the last video, the one that got posted just before this one, I had a couple people correct me about something I got wrong about talking about the Dark Angels Black Knights bikers. Even that was actually a really positive interaction. So I have no notes. I just genuinely want to hear from you guys. But with all that stuff out of the way, we're talking about Chaos Space Marines today, so let's just get into it. Okay, so we're going to start off talking about the Chaos Space Marines Army rule, and this is known as Dark Pacts. That's the name of the rule, and what Dark Pacts does is that anytime in either the shooting phase or fight phase that you're making attacks with your unit, with one of your units, that unit can make a pact with the Gods of Chaos, and when it does so, you make a leadership check. You roll 2d6, and hopefully you roll higher than your leadership. Higher than or equal to. And after you do that, you gain either lethal hits or sustained hits 1. Pretty simple, right? And the cool thing is, even if you fail the leadership check, you still get the Dark Pact, you still get the effects, you just also take D3 mortal wounds, which I will be the first to say, super thematic, super in keeping with the lore, definitely indicative of the relationship between the traitor Marines and their gods. But I will say, compared to like Oath of Moment, this rule feels a little weird. I mean, I won't deny there's definite versatility here compared to Space Marines, where they're like trying to cram characters into their units to gain these rules. The ability of CSM to just hand it out everywhere, undeniably potent. I think Guard in 9th edition definitely showed that 6s to hit auto wounding, very powerful, very useful. Definitely a way to bypass kind of high toughness armies like Knights or Custodes or Orcs. Definitely can be very useful, and again, just a lot of utility. So it's maybe not as dramatic as Oath of Moment, just letting you pick one thing and basically saying, we're going to destroy that thing. But I just find it, I definitely think it's a army rule that you have to think about it a little more. You have to think of where you're going to use it, because particularly in an army like Chaos Space Marines, where you don't necessarily have a lot of bodies on the table, you tend to be a little more points intensive than other factions like the Guard or the Astra Militarum. Or the Orcs or Tyranids, so like your lack of board presence can already be kind of a problem, and it really only takes a few failed leadership checks, and now all of a sudden you're losing huge chunks of your squads. I don't know how much I like it. And this is a big part of why I haven't dusted off my Night Lords in 10th edition, is because I'm just not sold on this army rule. And I say that even knowing that they took a huge win on the competitive scene not too long ago. So clearly the faction is usable. I'm just not convinced it's because of the army rule, and maybe it's more because of just the really good units, some really amazing characters, and also just the fact that, in my experience, Chaos players, they tend to be very dedicated. They tend to really love their faction and are going to be able to take full advantage of their rules. So it's maybe not surprising that they've done well on the tournament scene. They tend to be pretty well put together, pretty squared away players. They tend to know what they're doing. And I'm not just saying that hoping that I'll get some Chaos players to subscribe to this channel. It's genuinely been my experience. But anyways, that is the army rule. Those are my thoughts on it. By all means, let me know how wrong I am in the comments below. But moving on to the actual detachment for the Index Chaos Space Marines, the detachment is known as Slaves to Darkness. Very common name used in Sigmar, used in 40k, and just like a super cool name, the Slaves to Darkness. Like, sounds very intimidating. I feel you have to give Chaos Space Marines points for style. They are edgelords supreme. But their detachment rule, if I wasn't completely sold on their army rule, their detachment rule really has me kind of scratching my head a little bit, because the detachment rule is the Marks of Chaos, which, if you're an experienced Chaos player, you know that this has been around forever. The Marks of Chaos have been around at least since 8th and 9th. I'm pretty sure they were a thing in 7th. Longer than that, and you'll have to ask somebody else. I was still very much an exclusive Dark Angels player back then, so I wouldn't know. But the way Marks of Chaos work is that there's one for each of the Chaos Gods and one for Chaos Undivided. So Mark of Khorne, the way that works is in the fight phase. when you're making an attack with a unit, if they have the Mark of Khorne, and you make a Dark Pact, and you pick lethal hits, the Mark of Khorne will let those lethal hits happen on 5s and 6s rather than just 6s. And the marks of Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh all work more or less the same way to that. With Tzeentch, it's in the shooting phase, and if you pick lethal hits. With Nurgle, it's shooting if you pick sustained hits, and with Slaanesh, it's in the fight phase if you pick sustained hits. So, the thing that I find a little weird about this is they're all really similar to each other. And then the even weirder part is that the Mark of Chaos Undivided, the one that should probably have the most in common with all of them, instead is when you make a Dark Pact, you now reroll hit rolls of 1. Which, to me, is just objectively better, because you can make use of that mark in both the shooting and fight phases, and reroll 1s is genuinely very effective. Now, again, I might be showing my bias here that I prefer rerolls rather than buffed mechanics. That's just something I've kind of had ingrained in me for a while. So again, maybe I'm wrong on calling Chaos Undivided the strongest one. I think it is, but I could be missing out on that. It just, to me, it's the fact that these marks only apply in a particular phase, which that part I totally understand. Khorne has always been a melee thing. Like, Khorne and Slaanesh have always been about the fight phase. I totally understand that part. But it only happens if you make a Dark Pact, and then only if you pick the right rule. And so it just kind of, considering the whole thing of the army rule is that it's meant to be very versatile and let you respond to what you're fighting, the fact that the marks then only reward you for picking a specific rule, it just feels a little... Like, what if I'm playing a Khorne army and I find myself in a position where sustained hits would be doing me more good? But even as I say that, I can already see how... the fact that the Marks of Chaos are free, I can totally see why they maybe didn't want to make these too strong, because... Particularly coming off of 9th edition, where I feel like a lot of people would argue maybe the Chaos Marks were a little too good, I can totally understand why people might want to tone it down. That makes sense to me. And particularly because I could definitely see how using them all in conjunction could start to make a very potent force. That your shooting stuff gets even better at shooting, your fighty stuff gets better at fighting. Yeah, and so I could totally understand how like, oh, maybe your legionaries are Chaos Undivided to get those rerolls on their bolt guns. Maybe you're putting Mark of Nurgle and sustained hits on your las cannons while putting so that you're getting the exploding 5s and 6s on your las cannons. Totally see that being useful, or really any of your heavy weapons, if I'm being real. Tzeentch is the one that I'm not so sold on. Like, I feel like that one would also go on your legionaries to make their bolt guns more effective, but again, I almost feel like Chaos Undivided makes more sense there. But again, with Mark of Khorne, Raptors, they've got strength 4 chainswords. I could totally understand wanting to give them lethal hits, particularly if you're going up against things like Custodians, Knights, maybe monster heavy Tyranids. I could totally understand against higher toughness enemies wanting to really lean your Raptors into lethal hits. Or your Warp Talons are already going to have a bunch of attacks. Maybe go ahead and give them sustained hits so they can have even more attacks. I could totally see that being a thing. So I'm not saying it's a useless detachment rule. I'm just saying it feels a little situational, that you have to risk the Dark Pact and pick a specific rule, on top of it being specific to a particular phase. Just feels a little limiting, all the while that it's giving you a bunch of utility. And it just kind of feels like the army rule of these Dark Pacts was meant to give you a lot of variety and utility, but then all of a sudden the detachment rule is like, no, we don't want variety, we want you to force this unit into one thing. Because if you're going Mark of Khorne, you're basically never going sustained hits. You should basically just always go lethal hits. Same thing with Tzeentch. If you're going Mark of Tzeentch, never go sustained. You should only ever do lethal. And so that just feels a little like, hey, that first rule is all about giving you utility and variety, but then the marks are all about, no, taking away utility and leaning into specializing. Again, to me, just something ain't jiving there, and I say this even as I know they've done well on the tournament scene. So Again, I'm sure one of you guys will point out to me where my mental block is with this. I'm just not sold that this is necessarily the most potent combination of rules, and that maybe the success is coming more from the variety of units and the quality of the characters. But that's one man's take, and by all means, do let me know in the comments if it's a bad one. I would love to be educated, because I am far from a veteran Chaos player. I am the noobiest of noobs, and clearly, since I chose Night Lords as my sub faction, clearly I'm a bit of an edgelord. So by all means, straighten me out in the comments. Let me know. But seriously, I do want to hear from you guys about what are some combos you guys have been using for Chaos Space Marines. Like help me bridge the gap and see how these guys are working. I really want to know. I want to see it. I want to understand how these guys are doing so well. So do let me know. We have reached the end of the video, so I do want to thank you guys for hanging in there. I know I can go on for a bit, but I would love to see, like I said, would love to see you guys in the comments down below. I would love to hear what you guys have to say. I would love to see you over on some of our other videos here on the channel. But in the meantime, happy wargaming.
Onward to glory!